What if events had unfolded differently? What if Norman Osborn had been bitten by the radioactive spider instead of Peter Parker in the 2002 Spider-Man movie? In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a concept that I did over 1 year ago with what if Harry Osborn was bitten by the spider, but now we're going to be doing Norman Osborn. This is going to be a very interesting what if, and I do want to say that the Mary Jane Watson bit by the spider series, I was doing that for a while, and I know a lot of people want me to continue that series, and I feel like I kind of fell off of that because I went into a very different direction with the multiverse and how I was introducing brand new characters, and I felt that I needed a break from that particular series to really get back in and to see where I can go with that. So that's why I kind of want to do a refreshment with the Bit by the Spider series and go into Norman Osborn's character and see where he would have been going if he was Spider-Man. So this is going to be very interesting. It's a flipped story, so I do hope you enjoy. But that being said, let's dive right into the cinematic journey. Peter Parker and his classmates have been invited to the Columbia University laboratory as a part-time fulfillment of their academic curriculum. They were having the time of their lives, and Peter was getting a close and personal time with his love interest Mary Jane. He decided to take her picture for the school magazine. All was going well until disaster struck. A fire had broken out totally unknown to them. Harry, Peter, and Mary Jane had been in the sector of the lab that was restricted and no one knew where they were. It was after that they had done the head count after the emergency evacuation that they then realized that 3 students were still missing. Norman, being a father, was overtaken by instinct and rushed into the burning building to save his son. And while he ran in, Peter, Harry, and Mary Jane have already made their way out. On getting outside, they were told that Mr. Osborn had just rushed into the building in search of them. Harry then decided to go in after his father, even though everyone tried to stop him. They both got trapped into the fire, and while they were together, the radioactive spider then dropped on Norman's hand, biting him. This little change in his system kept him alive long enough for him to rescue Harry before the firefighters arrived. Harry ended up surviving without a scratch, but tragically Norman was injured badly from the fire. With the injuries Norman had sustained from the fire, one would expect him to spend months in the hospital trying to recuperate, but the change in his body was going through only kept him for a few days. In less than a week, he was completely healed, so fast that the doctors had called it a miracle and tried to keep him longer to study him and see what was different. But Norman didn't feel lucky, even though everyone told him he was. He had wished that he died and his son survived instead. He had awoken up to the bad news. While he had been recovering in the hospital, Peter had suggested for him and Harry to go watch a wrestling match together in town just to keep them distracted from everything that had happened. After the match, they were attacked by an armed robber, who, seeing the flashy car Harry and Peter had come in, was expected for them to have money. They were attacked and asked to bring all of their money, but in the argument and struggle and confusion that followed, Harry's refusal to comply and threats towards the guy, the man shot Harry and killed him. There was nothing good about any of it. A father burying his own son. Harry's funeral was short and painful. His grave was surrounded by friends and family all dressed in black, and his father was left in tears, wishing things were different, that he never ran into the burning building. Maybe he had just waited a little longer, things would have been different. He knew that something had changed about him. He was feeling more intensely and experiencing life more vividly than he was before the accident. He also knew that he was much stronger and faster, and maybe his miraculous recovery wasn't so miraculous after all. It must have had something to do with the spider that bit him on that terrible day. Norman decided to lock himself up in the lab and find out what had changed in him. He had sworn that as long as he could do something about it, no father was going to lose their son again, not in New York City. After his intense research with his newfound abilities, Norman took on the role of a protector of the city and defended it against people who would stop at nothing to do evil. But Peter had gone down a dark path and had blamed himself for everything that happened. If only he had not suggested that they went to the restricted side of the lab just to take a better picture, and hopefully impress Mary Jane. If only he had not suggested that they went to watch the wrestling match, maybe Harry wouldn't have died. He was going to stop at nothing to get vengeance for Harry and whoever killed him and who was responsible for his death. After the death of Harry, Norman and Peter became very close, and Norman took him as his own son, almost as if he was trying to use Peter to replace the Harry he lost. He then opened up to Peter and about his powers and what he was using them to do. Peter got angry and told him what he needed to do, and that was to find Harry's murderer and make him pay, instead of playing the hero and trying to use him to replace Harry. Both Peter and Norman were hurt, and Peter angrily left, but he came back the next day and apologized that he was just angry and didn't mean all of the things he said. He also told Norman that he wanted to help him if he was going to be serious with the hero thing. Peter didn't mean anything he said, and he only came back because he believed Norman didn't deserve the powers he was given and that he deserved it more. Maybe in another reality, he was the one that had these gifts. He was going to work closely with Norman, and at the same time, he was going to work against him. Norman channeled all of his company's resources into being Spider-Man and even made gadgets that were very useful for himself. He was also genuinely good and helped people whenever they were in need, but Peter on the other hand believed that the criminals deserved was death and nothing less, and while he helped Osborn be a hero, he worked underground in a secret area and only to find the person responsible for Harry's murder with the intentions of killing him. After a while, there was an emergence of an anti-hero that rather than arrest the criminals, he killed them. Osborn himself thought it was only wrong and that everyone deserved a second chance, but Peter, like some people, agreed with this anti-hero because they believed killing the criminals was the only permanent way to end crime. If there was no criminals at all, crime would not be a thing and it wouldn't exist. Osborn told Peter to divert some resources into finding this hobgoblin that for some reason used a lot of the Oscorp tech. Osborn one night went on patrol, and for the first time he met the hobgoblin, who was about to literally take out some criminals. The first thing he noticed was his communication with Peter had been severed by this villain, but without backup or support and not wanting to wait, Osborn engaged the villain in a fight. He was using very similar tech with him, and it was just not copied, but in fact was the same tech. He had also noticed that the villain constantly held back while fighting him, almost as he didn't want to hurt him. Osborn used that advantage to hurt the hobgoblin, giving him an obvious scar on his arm, and then finally throwing a tracking device on him as he fled the scene. Later that night, Norman called his friends and family over for dinner in remembrance of Harry. But while they were having a dinner, he noticed that Peter was avoiding using his right hand, and it looked like there was a blood stain on his sleeve of his jacket. How did he not even notice all this while? All the time, Peter had just suddenly gone missing or had gone cold during a mission, with the only explanation being terrible reception. Was it possible that Peter was the hobgoblin? He then decided to ask Peter what was wrong with his arm, and Peter told him that he had just been in an accident in the lab and that his hand was injured. He offered to see it, but Peter drew back and told him not to bother. He didn't want to believe his suspicions that were true, but when he checked his phone to see the location of the tracker he had put on the hobgoblin, the tracker showed that the hobgoblin was right in front of him. There was no doubt at this point that the same evening he called Peter into his office, and without hiding it, he directly told him that he knew that he was the hobgoblin and that there was no point in hiding it anymore. He then asked Peter why he decided to do this. Peter told him that he was not doing enough. He was allowing the person who took Harry away from them roam the streets of New York free and alive, and that he owed it to Harry to make sure that the person paid for what he had done. Osborn then told Peter that he knew how he was feeling and told Peter that he had also felt like that, and for a long time he blamed himself for Harry's death and wished death on the person who had taken his son from him. But now he realized that he was better to let the law take its course, and Peter was not responsible for avenging Harry. It was not his burden to bear, and that he should stop what he is doing. Osborn then told Peter that he didn't want to be forced to stop him and asked him to stop before it's too late. Peter laughed and said that it was too late to stop and that he disagreed with him. It was his responsibility to avenge Harry. Harry was his best friend and he could not live with himself knowing that Harry's killer was somewhere out there. He then added that it was too late to stop him and no one could stop him either way. While Osborn had been out plying the righteous hero, he had been developing a serum that would supposedly mirror his powers. He then brought out a goblin serum and immediately injected into himself with it before Osborn could stop him. Peter screamed in pain as the serum changed him, enhanced him, but also driven him mad for a moment, and he immediately attacked Osborn and they engaged in a heated battle. He threw Osborn across the room and lunged at him, and began to pound at him, even though rather than fighting back, Osborn tried to reason with Peter to stop, but Peter was not there anymore. It was only a broken shadow of his former self. Osborn has always seen Peter like a second son to him and thought of attacking him was not right. After Peter had beaten him up and thrown him into several walls across the room, he suddenly became normal again. The effects of the goblin serum had not been permanent. When Peter had seen what he did under the influence of the serum, he was ashamed of himself and told Osborn that the last thing he wanted to do was to hurt him before he fled, as Osborn screamed after him and told him to wait. He escaped, and from that day on, nobody would find Peter until 2 years later. Peter surfaced, but he was very different. He had mechanical tentacles stuck to his back from a failed experiment he conducted. He had made peace with his condition and was stronger for it. Osborn had a feeling that the sudden appearance of Peter had to do with the police, revealing that Flint Marko, who had been mutated by a particle accelerator, was the actual killer of Harry Osborn. Norman knew that if he could find the Sandman, he would also find Peter. By tracking the Sandman down, Osborn stumbled into an accelerator between Peter and Marko. The Sandman could not be destroyed no matter how much Peter broke him and threw him around. He was just reforming back again and again and attacked some more. Peter destroyed the plumbing and flooded the space, which resulted into the Sandman turning into mud. Thinking it was destroying him, Osborn interfered with the fight and stopped Peter. He told Peter that everyone missed him and asked him to come home. He also added that this wasn't the way to get justice and that he didn't have to do all of this, but as he spoke, the Sandman was trying to reform and escaped. Peter got enraged and screamed at Osborn that he was letting the Sandman escape, and with one of his mechanical arms, he threw Osborn in an attempt to stop the Sandman, but it was too late. Peter then told the wounded Osborn that if he got in his way again, he was going to kill him for good. Peter needed to find a way to stop the Sandman. It was very easy to find him, but it was virtually impossible to kill him and could only be weakened. He decided to invest into finding ways to destroy the Sandman for good, and he needed money to do that. He decided to rob a bank, and in the process of it, Osborn came in as Spider-Man and tried to stop him, and as fate had planned it, Mary Jane happened to be in the particular bank that day, and seeing her, he changed his mind and wanted to leave. But Osborn attacked him, telling him that he had taken things too far this time and that he was going to stop him by all means. He tried talking to Osborn, but Osborn told him that the time to talk was over and that the only thing he could do was surrender, but instead Peter tried to leave, and as Osborn engaged him in a fight, the roof collapsed and Mary Jane got injured. Although not fatal, Peter became angry and decided to destroy the bank. Osborn tried to apologize as he didn't know Mary Jane would be caught in a crossfire. Peter threw Osborn out of the bank and knocked him unconscious before he took Mary Jane to a hospital and fled after that. He came back later and in the evening to see Mary Jane, and he asked her how she was doing. She informed him that she was getting married and that she missed him and missed Harry. She also said that she missed how life was before everything started happening. Then Peter confessed to Mary Jane that he had always been in love with her and didn't want her to get married. She then said to him that if he really did love her, he would allow her to be happy and also find happiness himself. He then told her that he wanted to be happy and didn't enjoy what he was doing. She then asked him to stop and return back to them, and then he agreed but told her that the only way he could ever stop was after the Sandman was dead and had paid for his sins, and then he left. Peter then decided that Osborn needed to be out of the picture. Spider-Man had many enemies and people who wanted to get him out of the picture too. He decided to partner up with Venom and Otto Octavius, who has already been introduced in this universe. He had promised them to give them Spider-Man and to reveal his identity to them if only he would get the Sandman. Venom and Octavius then kidnapped the Sandman's sick wife and daughter to use as bait to lure him, but as they attacked the hospital, Spider-Man came and tried to stop them. They were able to successfully kidnap the Sandman's family, but Spider-Man trailed them to the waterfront lab and engaged them in a fight trying to save the Sandman's family. Peter was angry and asked Norman why he was trying so hard to save the family of a man who took his own son away, and Osborn told him that he was trying to break the cycle of hate and that Marko would pay for what he had did, but not like this. The bait worked and Sandman was soon to join the fight, demanding that his family be released. Peter told Venom and Octavius to keep Spider-Man busy while he faced the Sandman. Octavius was knocked unconscious as a pumpkin bomb went off in his glider and it disabled it, while Osborn used a sonic cannon to disable the Venom symbiote. On the verge of Peter using the nuclear reactor he was building to turn the Sandman into glass permanently, Osborn tried to reason with him one last time, asking him to stop. Spider-Man told Peter that he was not going to kill just the Sandman and his family. At this rate, he was going to end up destroying the whole city, killing everybody including Mary Jane, who he was getting married at the moment. Then he asked if it was going to be worth it. If it wasn't worth it, the last thing he wanted to do was to give Mary Jane another reason to cry or hurt in any way. He told the Sandman that he would only stop the reactor if he promised to surrender and go to jail for his crimes and confess to killing Harry. The Sandman agreed and said as long as that's what he wanted, he was going to do it to save his wife and daughter. Peter tried to stop the reactor, but it didn't stop. He then told Spider-Man and the Sandman to run and that it was too late to turn off the reactor. He was going to have to kill himself. Osborn tried to talk him out of it, but he refused and collapsed the laboratory. Sandman and Spider-Man made it just in time for only Peter to be stuck on the other side. Peter destroyed the reactor and killed him and sank the entire lab underwater. Flint Marko was true with his word and agreed to go to jail and then told Osborn that, for what it's worth, killing Harry was an accident and that it was never meant to happen and that he was sorry for it. Osborn promised him that he was going to take care of his family as he was going to take care of Peter's family while he did his time in jail. And that is going to be it for this very short but very interesting what if on what if Norman Osborn had been bitten by the radioactive spider in the 2002 Spider-Man movie. We explored a role where it was the reversal of different characters, and I think it was a very interesting thing to see, and we were able to see how the story had gone if Harry was killed and Peter became a vengeful and unforgivable Punisher. We can see how his quest for vengeance consumed him, just kind of like the 1994 animated series with Spider-Carnage. It's almost as if his entire life had been ruined because his best friend was killed. We can all agree that there has always been elements of darkness in Peter Parker as a character, which was very interesting to explore in this alternate reality when he became the Hobgoblin and when he became almost like Doc Ock. And that is going to be it for this fan fiction, so I do hope you enjoy What If Norman Osborn Was Bit by the Spider, and until next time, we'll see where the story goes when MJ gets bit by the spider in part 5. Anyways, as always guys, thanks for tuning in, and if you guys did enjoy this video, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with latest content. But anyways, as always guys, thanks for tuning in, and have an amazing day.